Baron Boleric is the one behind the incident in Thrym Village. Counselor Ivy learned about this fact after breaking the barrier on her own and joining up with them. Ivy then told Andreas to cut Butler's head off and to try to not cut his face. Ivy angrily told them that they would be going to the Baron's castle instantly. The group started to move immediately, and Andreas, looking at her, said to himself that her killing intent is terrifying. Christopher was dead and Hazar was missing, which did not surprise Andreas. After reaching the Baron's castle, Ivy shoved a guard down and shoved her sword in the ground beside him. The soldiers told them to put their swords away and asked them who they were. She introduced herself as Ivy Clare, assistant professor of Rodlin Academy's night faculty. She told them that from that moment on, anyone who defends Baron Boleric is guilty of treason and will be executed immediately. Andreas, who was carrying the body of Christopher, was scared, thinking that she would kill them all. Ivy then showed the head of the butler to the soldiers to their shock and asked if they recognized him. She continued by telling them he was the one responsible for what happened in the village of Thrym, and ordered the soldiers to take them to the Baron immediately. After breaking the Baron's door, the group entered the room and saw something that shocked them. The Baron was sitting there and knew that Evan died after Ivy and her group reached there. He was sitting beside a huge body which was being roped in the bed from which his spine was coming out, eyes in places besides the head, and introduced him as his son Edel. He continued saying that Edel should have died a few months ago, and Andreas realized that it was why he dabbled in black magic. While looking around for more medicine, a robed man visited the Baron, and the man said he had a way to help his son. The Baron told them to do whatever it took to save Edel's life, even if it meant leaving him in that miserable state, pointing at Edel, who was crying. Ivy was disgusted by it. The Baron then asked Edel to forgive his foolish father, walking towards the Baron, and tells him to say that to the people he and his butler screwed over and shoved him away. Ivy then ordered the soldiers to go and call the investigation team right away and to get rid of the monster in the back. Andreas then made a rock spear, and to everyone's surprise, threw it at Edel. That killed him, to his father's horror. The Baron then went over to his son to cry. Ivy asked Andreas why he killed Edel without her orders. He said that a creature born of black magic should be dealt with immediately, before it made any sudden moves, and besides, any important information would be in the Baron's hand. The Baron was then arrested and immediately taken by the investigation team. They were also transporting Edel's body. When they returned to the academy, Vivian and Andreas had to give their testimony. The investigator told them that it was clear that Baron was colluding with a black mage, and they would bring the Baron for another hearing. The investigator then told them that they could go home. The Baron's consequence for colluding with a black mage would be severe, but the Baron should be thankful to Andreas, because if he didn't kill Edel, he would have suffered the hell of being experimented on by a bunch of insane wizards. Vivian asked if Mr. Fairy had figured out all about the Baron's son, and asked him if he didn't want to let him live in suffering. Andreas saw her like the child of her dream. Andreas asked what fairy she was talking about. He almost talked like a fairy. Vivian told him that he sounded just like the fairy. Lucia then came running at him, calling his name out, and asked him if his business was over. Andreas told her that they said the hearing's over. She then took out her tablet and told him to look at it and that he was famous. The topics were all about Andreas and the Dark Mage. Lucia told him that it had only been a short time since he unveiled the potion. Andreas was annoyed since all he wanted was some peace and quiet. Lucia excitedly told him that she heard he was getting a reward and requested to treat her to a meal. Andreas, looking at her weirdly, told her that the reward money had to be split. Lucia finally noticed Vivian and asked Andreas if she was the one with him on the news. Andreas introduced her and told Lucia to greet her. After introducing each other, Andreas apologized to Vivian because she was kind of dumb. Lucia then went back to the story and asked him that he would be getting the money anyway, and to go out to dinner and celebrate the success of their potion production. Since the jury wasn't out, the next day Andreas had to carry Lucia to the Rodlin Magic Tower. He was a fool to trust her. Once they reached there, a person asked if they were Andreas and Lucia, and to follow him. He took them inside and told them to be careful since the space inside the magic tower is constantly changing. After hearing that, Andreas forced Lucia to wake up and walk properly. Lucia then asked him what Andreas' relationship was with Vivian, and he told her it was nothing in particular. She then looked at him with doubt, confusing Andreas. Lucia then brought up that they should go out for dinner, and Andreas told her that she was rich, and why kept begging him to treat her. A voice then came telling them that the two were not nervous at all and how cheeky they were. After hearing the voice, Andreas wondered who it was, but from behind them he came out and grabbed their shoulders. It was the owner of Rodlin Magic Tower, Bart Alvin. Bart went there with an eagle on his shoulders, and after looking, Andreas said that his son has that unchanging, stupid face. Bart Alvin, the head of Alvin House and master of the Rodlin Magic Tower. Andreas was wondering if the Tower Master was blowing things out of proportions by appearing personally. He then looked at Lucia and asked her if she was Viscount Hollington's daughter, and Lucia introduced herself. He then said out loud, "If you want people to remember your name, you have to build a reputation to match what they heard." He then told the man to stand back and that he would be the one in charge of them. He then started using space magic. Vivian told Andreas that the Tower Master really is a monster to be able to build such a difficult and complex space magic, but looked like he was exaggerating on purpose. Bart told them that he could hear them, and they teleported to the potion examination room. When the researchers saw them, they were really surprised. Bart asked them if they had finished the examination, and they told him that they finished the efficiency examination, and all that was left was to ask about the production method. After Bart drank the potion, he says that there are Moheim leaves, Todor tree essence, Jahaz fruit, and Peona mushroom, and asked Lucia and Andreas if there was anything else. Lucia told him it had Hong Pishi extract and Madarat root bark. He then went in front of Lucia and told her that he heard the rumors but to think she could make such potions at her age. Since the examination is over, Bart told them to approve it. He then went over to Andreas and asked why Cromwell's son was there. Bart said that on the paper, it was reported as a joint effort and asked them if he got carried. Andreas was there standing quietly. Lucia told him that without Andreas, she wouldn't have been able to create the potion. Bart decided to verify it, and then he snapped his fingers and he started to use space magic again. Lucia notes that it seemed like he couldn't use the magic outside the magic tower. Bart then told Andreas to make the potion there, and the ingredients were in the storage. If Andreas used something he didn't use before, there could be a problem, so he went with the ones he knew. After 5 minutes, he made the potion and Bart drank it, acknowledging he created the potion correctly. He then started to question him on why he used Hong Pishi. Andreas answered him to get rid of side effects and to improve its efficiency. Lucia is surprised he is able to explain it well. Bart understood and he didn't need to go on even though Andreas hadn't finished explaining it. Bart took his blindfold off and told him even though they hadn't seen each other in a long time, the brat he knew couldn't come up with something like that. Bart asked Andreas who he was to everyone else's confusion. Bart and Andreas still looking at each other. Andreas smiled and asked if Alvin was joking, and he was definitely Andreas Cromwell. The same Andreas he treated like a bug and made fun of all the time. Bart was still staring at Andreas and told him that he had become quite the interesting lad. He then told Andreas to make a bet. If he discovered another medicine this year, he would pay off all of their debts and would grant him one wish, and if he failed, he would leave Rodlin Academy. The bet shocked everyone. Bart asked what Andreas thought of it. Andreas smiled even though the conditions were harsh, but he accepted the bet. As the heir of the Cromwell family, how could he refuse such an offer? Bart hopes he actually produces results, seeing he was so confident. He then saw the face of Andreas' father on Andreas, and remembered the times when he was alive. Bart, smiling, told Andreas he would be looking forward to it. Angela completed her evolution, and as she woke up, she broke her chains in the cage. She then smiled, remembering she promised not to kill Andreas. Andreas had got back some of the material costs, so the need for money for him had decreased a bit. As long as he kept making potions, he'd be able to solely focus on his training. The problem he had left was the Page of Sloth. How much ever he thought about it, he couldn't benefit from it, and should exchange it for something he needed. He decided to use Karen. After getting off the train, Andreas made his way to Karen, but he felt something strange. He thought that he was imagining things. Angela was watching him from a tree, smiling. After going in, Karen said that the hot topic of the academy finally visited him. Andreas had brought his potion to show Karen. He asked if it was the potion, and Karen told him that he came to report him right after the final examination ended. Karen was stumped since he had been researching in secret and hiding from Karen, and he finally acted like a real disciple. Andreas told him that he wasn't planning to. Karen told him to shut up and come with him to the research lab, and that he would engrave into Andreas what it meant to be his disciple. Andreas said to himself that he's holding a grudge because of something so trivial, and how stingy he is. He decided to not bring up Sloth's page that day, and talking to him when he is in a bad mood is a no-go. He would be satisfied with checking the vampire's condition. When they reached the research lab, to Karen's horror, it was destroyed completely. It seemed like the evolution was a success to Andreas. Andreas said to himself that it was a pity he wouldn't meet her anymore, and she was a nice sample. After seeing the chains broken, I got angrier. Karan asked Andreas if he did anything to Angela's restraints. Andreas told him that he was scared for his life. He, in his mind, called Karan an idiot. Karan was still angry, shouting, even though she was just a hybrid. Andreas was giggling to himself, seeing Karan's state, and said to himself that it served him right. Andreas was leaving the place and decided to bring up the Page of Sloth another day. But from behind him, Angela said his name to his horror. She was waiting to ambush him. She then put her hand on his neck. She had something to ask him ever since he woke up and asked him if he wanted to answer them. She then told Andreas to look at her, which he did. Angela then asked him about the power she got. Andreas asked her why she was doing it, and that he kept his word. He even told her that she should know the price of breaking the oath of her family name. Angela, levitating her legs using magic, smiled and told him she knew it all too well but couldn't help but ask him. She couldn't break free from the restraints with his own strength, no matter how much she tried, so she used another way. She asked Andreas if he knew what amazing method she used. She then realized that Andreas was giving off that smell, which was like a great sin. She then smiled and finally saw what it was. She touched his cheek. Andreas, not knowing what she was doing, and asked her what she was saying. She then shoved him to a tree and started to choke him. There were a lot of things she wanted to ask him, but since the place is too noticeable, she stopped for now since they would be meeting pretty soon. She told him for the time being she would be putting the power she obtained to good use, and since Andreas helped, she couldn't help but thank him. Andreas, who was still being choked, was shocked by her strength. She told him that she won't make him suffer since he would be her fated partner. In the delusion dormitory, Dine was excitedly preaching about something very excitedly to Julik, talking about Philip and his one-handed sword. Julik told Dine to stop her preaching even for a bit. Dine then told her that if she looks hard enough, even if she can find a knight to root for. Julik then changed the subject by telling her that Lucia Everlast passed the Magic Tower potion examination. Dine was amazed she managed to do it at her age, and she heard that she was lazy, but she was the real deal and like a sleeping dragon. Dine found that so cool, and wished she was like that too in her first year. Julich continued, saying that the most surprising part was that Andreas was there. She pulled out her tablet to show Dine and asked her if she could believe it. Dine was surprised to see Andreas there. Julich continued by telling to think someone as untalented as him managed to help create the potion. When she first heard it, she thought it was a lie too. After his family's downfall, Andreas could only blame his circumstances and talent. He once said, "What did you accomplish on your own?" to DNA. She wondered if that trash really changed. She needed to verify it herself. In class, Andreas was wearing a lot of clothes. Lucia asked him why he was wearing so many clothes. Andreas told her that he was not feeling well. She asked him why he is in class instead of resting, to which he replied he needed to attend enough classes to graduate. Vauban entered the class. The previous night, Angela bit Andreas. He can't let anyone see the huge scar in his neck. She also said something about a fated partner and smell, and Andreas pondered what she was talking about. She bit his neck and vanished. Vauban asked if everyone was there, and the students said yes. He then tried to start the lecture right away, but noticed Andreas and remembered that he created a potion. He then asked Andreas why he was wearing so many clothes and if he was sick. Andreas lied and told them that he had caught a cold. Vauban told him that he marked him as present and could leave. Vauban then continued by saying that it was quite lonely, and he even asked a professor of medical botany for advice, and if it was too difficult to include his name. Andreas was confused about what he was saying. He didn't contribute anything and wanted a piece of it. Andreas told him that he was grateful for the advice he got, especially the one regarding Hong Pishi extract and Matarada tree bark. Lucia wondered if he was picking a fight. Andreas continued by saying that the professor told him that if he added those he'd be making soup, but as he could see, the soup was too good. This made Vauban mad. The whole class was silent looking at him. He told Andreas that he was overstepping his boundaries. Andreas then tried to leave the room, but Vauban shouted his name. When Andreas was a small fry, he kept ridiculing him but now wanted to be friendly. Andreas said to himself that he should just shut up and lick his boots since he can just go to another class if he needed credits. He then asked Andreas how long he was planning to ignore him. Lucia then called out to Vauban, and he turned around. Lucia asked him if she could explain it on Andreas' behalf as someone who co-created the potion. Vauban told her to go on, and she said that they learnt the basics of potion making in the class, and they put the basics to practice. After hearing that, Vauban started to sweat a lot. She continued on saying that doing your own research without anyone's help meant a lot. She asked him if it was their duty as magicians. Vauban, nervous, said that she was right. Andreas was surprised to see Vauban being overwhelmed by Lucia. Lucia ended it by saying that they will ask for his advice next time, if he isn't occupied doing his own research. Vauban nervously told them that they could always go to him for advice. He then told Andreas to take care and get back safely. Lucia was saluting to Andreas. Lucia did well de-escalating the situation. He didn't know why she did that, but was thankful. He then left the class. Wango Officer Aura Master Duke. Sinclair Cloche was being reported about scoutable candidates. He was first getting reports about the students enrolled in Rodlin's academy. He amused asked her if the fact that Everlast Company's daughter created a new type of potion and made it available commercially. She told him that it was named Everlast Potion and is currently being monopolized. He then asked her for a sample. She brought him a sample, and Sinclair knew that since she already had made such a potion during her first year, she would have many people wanting to recruit her, which is why they needed to connect to her quickly. Sinclair, while drinking the potion, told her to check if there are any others who have their eyes on her. The potion surprised him, since it was several times more efficient than the ones on the market, and also had no side effects. If they commercialized it, it would revolutionize the market. She told him that there was something else to take note of. The report stated that the potion was co-created. After seeing the article in the tablet, he wondered if Kane Cromwell's son had a talent for potion making from the beginning. She told him that there were rumors circulating that he took advantage of her. But if that were the case, there would be no need to add his name, and neither of the households had any relationship with each other. He decided to investigate it, and if it appeared, he awakened a talent to add him on the scouting list. Someone asks his butler how the end-of-year award ceremony was going. The butler told him that just as he planned, the Cromwell family will be demoted. The man, swinging his wine glass back and forth, smiling sinisterly, looked forward as if Andreas was different from his father. In the dorm, Andreas swung his sword 1,000 times. He sat down after completing his practice and tired out as he drank the potion. Without those, he would not have been able to do it. The regeneration potion increased the recovery rate of his muscles, while healing potions took care of his fatigue, and by adding physical reinforcement potion, he created a system to train infinitely. It was a gamble, but evolving it was the right choice. He got the option to choose potion creation buff type evolution. He stressed about it a lot, but after some time he decided to evolve it anyway since the risk was low enough. He can now create more potions, and creation speed was increased too. As long as everything kept going the way it was, he'd be able to grow well. If he could get his hands on a good corpse and items, he wouldn't need to worry about his fighting strength, and since Karen was always away, he couldn't sell the Page of Sloth to him right away. He wondered if Sharon was in such a bad mood that he went traveling and couldn't even let his disciple know. He had no other connection beside him, and he had medical botany class the next day, so he decided to sleep. In the class, a note was there written by Vauban saying that the class would be taught outdoors as notified by their tablets. After looking at that note, Andreas cursed Vauban since he knew Andreas didn't have a tablet and used it to get back at him. While running outdoors, Andreas wanted to know what he was thinking of doing with the students. In the Rodlin Academy garden, when Andreas reached there, the students were making potions in a hurry, and it looked like an exam. Vauban told Andreas that he was late, and it seemed like he was too busy with his own research and if he didn't see the notice. Andreas wanted to know how immature a person can be. Lucia grabbed Andreas and pulled him away, telling him that she will explain everything while Vauban was giggling. While showing him her tablet, she told him to buy a tablet at that point, and that he had money now. In the tablet, Vauban is said to have created an awakening potion, and came up with the idea to make an exam to analyze it. Vauban must have felt the need to brag about it. Vauban went over to Andreas and cooked for someone of his caliber. Figuring out the ingredients and proportions of the potion would have been a breeze. Andreas in his mind called Vauban an obstinate motherfucker. The professor told him that today, he'd finally be exposed for what he was, but in his mind said that there was no need to be ashamed since he had a very bright future ahead. He mixed up what he meant to say, and his real intention. Vauban said to himself that Andreas took advantage of Lucia, and that he was nothing but a TRA student. After 4 hours in the analysis test results, Lucia was first and Andreas was second, to Vauban's shock. He was told that there was no cheating of any kind in the examination. The students were also shocked by hearing that Andreas had a talent for potion making. Lucia told Andreas good job while calling him a seaweed. Then a fat student came shouting Vauban's name and why he did it. Vauban was shocked to see him. To everyone's shock, asked him why Vauban claimed the position on his own. Gerolf asked him how he could do that, and Vauban knew more than anyone else how much effort he put in. The students were then shocked, never expecting a teacher to be like that. Andreas asked Lucia what she thought, and Lucia told him if it was Professor Vauban, he probably did it. Andreas then started to go to Vauban with Lucia panicking, asking him where he was going. Lucia got a bit mad since she saved him the other day, and that she doesn't care about the stupid, stubborn seaweed. Andreas went over to Professor Vauban and told him that he had a question related to the ingredients of the potion, with Vauban telling him it wasn't a good time. Andreas told him it was related to the situation, and if it was his own work, he should be able to prove that he made it right then. Vauban, panicking, cursed Andreas in his head. Gerolf asked him if he meant like the Magic Tower examination. Andreas then continued saying that if he truly made the potion, He should be able to explain why he used which materials easily, and asked him if he wasn't confident enough. Vauban, fixing his glasses, told him that he was confident and that he is the professor of the prestigious Rodlin Academy. Andreas asked him why he changed the upriver resin to slatamine petals. Vauban then panicked since he was so distracted by the presentation he forgot to check that part. Gerolf asked why he wasn't answering right away and told him it was because by using the petals they could cut costs, and if he developed it, he would have known. Then Andreas asked him more questions, and Vauban asked him what he thought he was doing, and only the magic towers could perform potion examinations. Andreas then asked the last question on why he used the more expensive Jolly Beetle instead of Pepina powder. The students were all already doubting him since he wasn't answering. They started to wonder if he really stole it as the professor was being torn apart inside. Vauban then, clutching his hands, answered, "It was because paprika powder had a hallucinogenic effect. That's why he used beetles even though they are more costly." Gerolf told him that that was not why he used the powder, and the reason was that the powder gets heated for a long time while potion was being made, which can give the one who consumes it stomachache. Vauban told him that he was wrong, and it was definitely because of the hallucinogenic effect. Gerolf remembered something about what he said, and that Vauban did tell him the powder had side effects, but not that it was a hallucinogen, and to explain to him how he came up with that answer. The students then asked him if he had no shame as a scientist and to think he would so far as to steal credits from his disciple. They started to call him a thief and scammer, making him angry and annoyed. With snot coming out his nose, he snapped, calling Gerolf and Andreas the scammers, and that the two of them set it up, and that he would report both of them to the disciplinary committee. Andreas knew he reached rock bottom, and when a child throws a tantrum, there is no choice but to leave it up to the adults. Andreas told him that if he was so annoyed, he can ask Sir Alvin to set up a place for him to explain. As Andreas took out a card, he said it should be possible since he was being sponsored by Alvin. Lucia is amazed he used the card to buy materials to threaten him, and maybe he'd fall for it. Vauban was shaking, and Andreas asked him if he wanted to explain himself. Vauban then gave up. An eagle was watching the whole commotion by which Alvin was looking through, and decided that Vauban needed to pay for causing such a commotion. Smiling, Alvin praised Andreas, and that he did his research and was cheeky of Andreas to use his name. Since he knew the theories and ingredients behind the awakening potion, he might be able to make a new medicine before the year ends. Vauban, who was crying, knew it was over for him, and Alvin would be looking forward to what Andreas comes up with. In the academy cafeteria, Vivian, Lucia, and Andreas were together eating. Lucia was shocked he actually invited her to eat together, but she didn't think it would be in the academy cafeteria. Andreas asked Lucia if she was not going to eat since it was so good. She said that she would, and when put her hand on the meat, screamed since it was hot. Andreas then taught the rich lady how to eat it by grabbing by the edge and drowning it in sauce. Lucia told him that it didn't matter she was rich while he was handing her the meat. She did not think that she could enjoy eating in the cafeteria. Vivian looked at them and told him that she wanted it too. Andreas was confused about what she was asking, and Vivian pointed at Lucia, after which Andreas understood. He smiled and gave it to her as well. While walking, Lucia asked Andreas when he was going to buy a tablet, and if he had one he would be notified if an event like that were to happen again. Andreas told her he didn't have the money, and Lucia told him that it wasn't even expensive. While those two were arguing, Vivian was happy that Mr. Fairy gave her meat. Vivian asked Andreas if he also wanted her reward money, calling him Mr. Fairy again. Lucia is confused why she called him Mr. Fairy. Andreas told her there was no need and asked her why she was calling him Mr. Fairy. Andreas then went the other way from them, bidding them farewells. While walking, he met Karan. He had finally come back. When he greeted Karan, Karan told him to come to the lab the next noon. Andreas was smiling since it was just in time. While buying it, he also asked for a whetstone. Dina called Andreas out from behind and asked him what he was doing at a blacksmith. While booing, he told her that he needed a sword. Dina is confused why he was buying a sword since he is a mage. He told her that it was good to have at least one for self-defense. Andreas then noticed a box she was carrying. Diana told him that she bought it for her ogre of a brother. Andreas thought that she meant Carlos Alvin. Carlos is the Alvin household's oldest son who left to train and become a warrior. Andreas and Carlos used to get along pretty well before. Carlos had already died when the game started, so the game glossed over him. He died at the Academy's end-of-year event. After Hazar escaped from the Duke Balaric's territory, he joined a religious cult, the Zephyrd cult, which the terrorists attack. Andreas asked Diana if Carlos was also participating in the end-of-year event, to which she said yes. He told her that it would be nice for them to meet each other, just the three of them. Diana had heard what everyone was saying about him. She was now sure that he had somehow changed. She wondered how she should ask him and decided to ask him normally. Andreas asked her if there was something she wanted to say, to which she was flustered and didn't say anything. Andreas then told her that he would see her later than he left. When she turned around to ask him, he was already gone. Andreas, after thinking about Carlos for a bit, there was still time until the terrorist attack occurred. In the academy teaching department, Karen told Andreas that he was searching the whole continent for a material of the same quality as Angela, but hasn't found one, so he intended to keep searching a little longer. Karen's hopes weren't high, but needed it for the congregation the weekend. Andreas knew that was when his game began. If Karen got blinded by greed and asked Andreas to give the sloth pages to him, Andreas wins. After closing his book, Karen told him that they will be busy for the time being and to brace himself. Andreas told Karan that he wanted to talk about something. Karen asked him what it was. Andreas told him that he managed to get the Apocalypse Codex, to Karen's shock. He then coughed, telling him to not say stupid things, and that is not something he could get his hands on. Andreas then took it out, telling him that it was something he couldn't handle. After he took it out, to Karen's shock, Andreas told him that he wanted Karen to have it. Karen reluctantly denied, telling Andreas he could keep it. He continued to say it was a highly sought item, so keeping it would cause trouble. They would take it to the congregation to exchange for another item. Andreas expected him to say that since Karen prioritizes his lie over anything else. Since they were going to the congregation the weekend, Karen told Andreas to clear his schedule and prepare himself. In the eastern edge of city, confinement zone forest of captivity adjacent area, Andreas made it through Karen but now needed to get through the congregation. There are many dangerous individuals there, and words won't get through them, so he'd have to negotiate as safely as possible. Taking a glance at Karen, Karen wanted to trade the page of sloth for the items that would help him grow, and would take anything he would get from it. Andreas is smiling since Karen thinks that the page of sloth is already his, but if push comes to shove, he would use Andreas as a shield. The cart then was stopped by someone outside. Looking through his skeleton's eyes, Karen was shocked. The man took his hoodie off and asked if he could tag along with them to the congregation. Andreas was shocked to see his face since he was Salem Edida. After getting in the cart, he sat comfortably immediately. Salem Edida is one of the continent's greatest 10. He is even willing to deal with the forbidden for the sake of exploring, which is why he became known as the Devil in pursuit of the truth. If the information of the sloth page got leaked, the situation would not end as well. Karen was there agitated. Salem asked him what that expression was. Salem, making an angry face, asked him if he was dissatisfied since he was going to the congregation. Karen panicked and told him it was not the case. Salem, laughing loudly, told him not to worry since he had gone there several times. Andreas was surprised he would go this far. Salem then went close to Andreas and asked his name. Karen told Andreas to introduce himself, and that Salem is his senior. Andreas told his name, and Salem, making a shocked face, said that Karan got his hands on another Cromwell. Andreas, looking at Karen, wanted to know what he was talking about. He was saying it in a way that suggests there's some kind of secret about the Cromwell family. Salem, hiding his mouth, found out that the kid didn't know anything. He then gave Andreas a special piece of advice to struggle as much as possible. Karen was there silent, and Andreas, looking at it, decided to not ask anything about it but wanted to know what Karen was hiding from him. In the road there was something that looked like a puddle. After seeing what it was, Karen stopped the cart. He then asked what he wanted and if he had something to talk about, do it in person to Dragon, the person in the puddle. After coming out of the puddle wholly, Dragon apologized and greeted Karen. Dragon, who was smiling before after entering the carriage, turned to nervousness. He did not expect them to be together with Salem. Salem told him to shut up since his breath stink. Dragon was probably trying to steal the page of sloth but did not expect them to be with Salem. Karen, pointing at something, told them that Sir Morsh had noticed that they had arrived and showed them the path to the congregation. Salem complains it was very high up. Salem then noticed something and smiled since something happened just as he expected. To the other two's surprise and Andreas' confusion, Salem continued saying that there are some pretty greedy black mages there. Karen and Dragon wondered if they were stupid, trying to steal the codex while Salem was there. They were hiding in trees casting magic, which started to bind on everyone. Raising his staff, Salem wanted to know how many there were, after slamming it on the ground, destroying the bind and searching the whole area. This made him find the core of the mages to the thief's shock. He then took the staff off the ground and found out there were 7 of them. Salem, licking his mouth, told them that they were done playing hide-and-seek. He then instantly went to them. The thieves, knowing that they were found out, a man shouting to run away, saw Salem in front of him. Salem then blew the area off. In the congregation, one purple-haired boy was drinking, a girl was sleeping laying her head on a giant, and another man hiding his face was silent. After opening the door, Salem screamed a greeting at Morsh, telling him that it had been a long time. Karen also greeted Morsh and Jester. Jester was dissatisfied with Salem being there. But Salem told him to not be so cold, and it's thanks to him that the Page of Sloth is sound and safe. Salem then told Andreas to open the bag. In the bed there were the heads of the thieves. Jester asked him why he committed unnecessary murder when they were in an emergency meeting. They were all intermediary and up-black mages who were annoying to deal with in the game for Andreas. But Salem managed to deal with them by just releasing magic power. Salem scoffed at them, telling them that without him they wouldn't even catch a glimpse of the sloth. Jester then told him to hurry up and show him the Page of Sloth. Karen and Andreas nodded at each other, and Andreas took out the Page of Sloth. Salem found Andreas quite interesting because he didn't flinch after seeing a massacre and didn't hesitate to cut their necks off. But what Salem most interesting was that Andreas was dual-core like him. Salem then sneaked behind Andreas, who was taking out the page, and blew him on his neck. Andreas, surprised by that, asked him what he was doing since Salem wasn't like that in the game. Salem told him that he has taken a liking to Andreas. Jester asked Salem what he thought he was doing, and Morshe told him to end the jokes. Salem told Andreas that he will help Andreas someday, but once, and to see it as a favor since he had some affinity with the Cromwell family. Andreas was shocked that Salem promised, since he is someone who never breaks his promises. Since he had Salem's help, Andreas decided to change his plans a little. Nickel then came out with the Page of Sloth, and Charon didn't know when Andreas summoned a skeleton. The congregation was sure it was the real diligent sloth. Salem asked Andreas if he entrusted the codex to a skeleton, and he thought it must be pretty durable. Andreas then calmed himself down since they didn't stand a chance with those monsters, and he can't hesitate even once. When almost giving the page, Andreas told Nickel to go back, and to everyone's shock, Andreas stabbed himself. Jester asked what he was doing. He told them that since he was the one who found the Page of Sloth, he wants his efforts recognized, appropriately. Morsh then started to form some vines to grab Andreas, but Jester told him that he went mad with greed. Andreas then told Morsh that the Page of Sloth is in his storage with his skeleton, so if he dies, they would never get their hands on the codex. Andreas then told Salem that he promised to help one time and the time was now. He told Salem to hurry up since he doesn't have much time. Salem is fascinated that he is acting so reckless because of something he said and asked him what if he tricked Andreas. Andreas told him that he'd do his best he could do, even if it meant he dies. To survive that crazy world, he was willing to be crazy himself. Salem told him that he is a real funny guy, and that he told him to struggle but did not expect him to go that far. Salem then started to use the Sinister Lance Evil Serpent, telling Andreas if he insisted, he would kill them all.
Salem warned everyone that anyone who tried to touch Andreas would suffer. The girl told him that they wouldn't touch him. Salem continued that if anyone dared to question later in, he would find and kill them. Jester asked him if he was seriously going to fight them over a kid, and Salem, smiling, replied he knows what he is like and he wouldn't tell a lie. Jester asked him if he was kidding, and Salem menacingly, and asked them if he had to repeat himself. Everyone there was silent while the girl was excited. Jester told Andreas what he wanted since it couldn't be helped. Andreas took out the sword and drank a potion to heal himself. Jester told Andreas to tell them what he wanted, and Andreas asked what he could get for it. Jester found it ridiculous that he didn't even know what he wanted and handed him a list and told him to pick 5 items from there. Jester told him that there are corpses too. Andreas, looking at the list, found the corpses of the former Fairy Queen, Mylene, and Tiger King Timer. Those were first-class materials which he needed to obtain. The thing behind Jester told him that the corpses were already sold to Morn, and he would be furious if they gave it. They were saying that the corpses had been bought by the leading figure of necromancy, Morn. If Andreas messed with him, things would be problematic and he has to give up. Morn then told them that he doesn't mind and to take it, Salem smiling at seeing how generous he was being. Everyone looked where the sound came from. It was a fly. Karen told his master that Andreas didn't have the ability to handle those corpses yet. Morn then said again that he didn't mind and told Andreas that the corpses are in his subspace bag and to take the whole bag with him. Andreas didn't know why he was being so generous, but didn't let the opportunity pass. He then bowed to him, thanking for his generosity, and he would select the rest of the items, including the corpses. Karen then regretted not bringing the Page of Sloth himself. Andreas took the moon's blessing, fairy's tears, blue Kanangala's flowers and Yobin's root, Kedunon's jewel, and the corpses. Salem told him if he wanted those since there were better things in the list. Andreas said that for him those items are very valuable. He could make a total of 4 potions but were worth several hundred million wills. and he also ended up picking out ingredients for Lucia's cure. Jester told him to hand over the page of sloth. After opening his subspace, he gave the page of sloth. Salem then asked Andreas if he was ready to go and took Andreas and flew out of there. The others tried to go after them, and Andreas asked Salem if they were planning on killing him once he gave the page of sloth. Salem told he was correct, and since a promise is a promise, he would take Andreas to a safe place. Andreas told him that he would like to go back to the academy and to take him to the nearest station. Salem asked him if Bart knew Andreas was a black mage. Andreas told him that if Bart knew, he would already be dead. Salem said fate is a real curious thing, and Andreas will figure it out once the time comes. Andreas asked him what he was talking about. Salem told him that he just needs to keep struggling, and as long as he can survive, he will find out who he is. After taking out the corpses, Andreas noted that the subspace bag is really handy. Andreas had no choice but to summon Nickel as a skeleton, but for the two, it would have been better if he increased his necromancy and turned them into high-level summons, and he will keep them in subspace for the time being. Andreas then noticed a book in the bag, and after picking it up, found out it was Morn's Black Magic Tome. It was a gift from Morn which contained a lot of knowledge he couldn't get at Karen's library. If he read that, he would be able to turn the corpses he got today into high-level summons. He then got a pop-up about Nickel's evolution. Andreas was wondering when Nickel would be able to evolve, and it was time. The fact that the status window appeared right after he gave Page of Sloth away looked like Codex had an effect on the evolution, but worrying about it won't get him anywhere. He pressed yes, since he had 100% chance of evolving. Nickel wasn't suffering like the vampire because he was an undead. Someone then knocked at his door, and Nickel went away. After opening, it was Lucia who asked if he had a moment. In Morn's room, Karen was there, who asked Morn if he gave him the information about the sloth, because he wanted someone to protect Andreas. Morn was quiet about it, and Salem started to laugh hysterically since it was a yes. Morn did take care of Cain and now his son too. Salem continued that he was forced onto Morn by the Empire, but was hard to teach him since he had no talent. Morn asked Salem if he knew the origins of necromancy. Necromancy is the pursuit of immortality. More precisely, it is the pursuit of immortality for those you love. Salem was silent, and Morn continued that it was born with the obsession of keeping loved ones with you for forever. Salem asked if it was an old man's tale. Morn said maybe. Salem said that since he was also a mage, Morn should understand what he was saying. Morn, laughing, said to leave it to his imagination. Andreas said that he got another tie to the Cromwell family besides Cain, and even if Salem forced, Morn wouldn't answer, so he gave up. Morn asked what Salem thought of Andreas. Salem snapped at him, saying that he knows Morn saw everything using the bug to snoop around. Smiling, Salem told him that the kid will be the most insane person in the world, even crazier than him, and he was looking forward to it. Willem Everlast Hollington and Andreas introduced themselves to each other. William invited Andreas to take a seat. After sitting down, William apologized to Andreas that he had to come all the way there just for initial settlement of the potion profits, and he wanted to talk in person. Since they would be working together, he had become a close friend of Lucia. Andreas told him that he also had been looking forward to meeting him and that he is grateful for the help Lucia gave him and provided with a good deal. William told him that he is the producer and he was entitled to at least that much. Lucia told him to be grateful since she is the one that made the good deal possible. William then handed the contract to Andreas where he could get 60% of the profits, and since each one is worth 3 million wills, the final amount he gets is over 1.8 billion to his shock. William told the shaken Andreas that they were selling like hotcakes and that the next sum he would receive will be much bigger. William then stopped the business talk and invited him for dinner. It was the first time Lucia brought a friend, and he was looking forward to hearing stories moreover since it's a boy. Andreas was there silent looking at him. After a month, thanks to word of mouth, the Everlast potion became very popular, not just for combat but taking high society circles by storm. To increase production, the trading company expanded its suppliers and production facilities. Andreas, holding a tablet, never guessed it would sell over 200 units in a month, and if he knew it was going to happen, he would have bought a tablet sooner. He never thought he would make so much money from the potion alone. Because of the potion's popularity, he also received more support from the nobility, and he had 6 billion wills on him. Cromwell's estate is worth 3.5 billion, including handling fees, and if he bought it back, he'd still have plenty of money to spare. In the train, the next stop was the National Cemetery. But before he bought back the estate, he needed to get the ring back. In the cemetery, he saw Paimon with someone who covered his face with a mask. Paimon told him to go inside and have some tea. Andreas asked who was next to him, and Paimon told Andreas that he was the guarantor to avoid problems later. After going in and sitting down, Andreas knew that the guarantor thing was a lie, since what kind of guarantor would be holding a sword and hiding his face? Andreas knows Paimon has been practicing necromancy for a while, but is nowhere close to the level of Karen, and he is just a small fry in the game. He was no match for Andreas right now, and evolved Nickel can use aura. The only issue he had was figuring out how strong the masked swordsman is. He thinks he should have released the energy in his Dantian, and he thought that holding back would be enough before. But now, he isn't sure. Paimon passed on tea to Andreas, telling him that it was from a guy he knew in the congregation. Andreas told him that he would rather talk about the signet ring. Paimon then called him impatient. Andreas told him that the corpse he bought was mediocre, but since Paimon was so accommodating, in exchange, he will give Paimon 5 million wills. Paimon started to sweat and complimented Andreas for being great without him noticing, and despite being rotten, he is still a count. Paimon then continued saying that it was a tad harsh, that the price of secrecy isn't cheap. Andreas asked him if he should pay more, but Paimon told him that he wanted to trade it for the stuff he got at the congregation, and since he got some good stuff, he wanted some of it. Paimon sinisterly asked Andreas if the deal wasn't bad. Andreas, sipping the tea, said that he appreciates the offer, but he will be clear, and 5 million wills, and no more. Paimon angrily tells Andreas that he doesn't sound like what he is saying to, which Andreas says that he knows what he meant and that he never intended to make it a fair deal. The guarantor, taking out his sword, tells Paimon that he thinks that they are done. Andreas says that he was getting tired of the charade and took out Nickel. To the other's surprise, Andreas asks them if they really think they could beat him. Nickel had evolved into Sloth Phantom. Paimon told the masked man that he would throw in extra money of what promised and to cut Andreas and take his stuff, when saying that Nickel had already went behind Paimon. When slashing his neck, the masked man blocked Nickel's attack while Andreas was sitting while Cape was coming towards him.
Andreas noticed that it had sticky bombs, which he used a lot in the game as he unsheathed his sword. As he cut the bombs, Andreas noted that the masked man was no ordinary person, since he managed to stop Nickel but also keep him in check. While their swords clashed, the masked man tried to stab Nickel, but Nickel dodged it and grabbed his foot. Throwing him, Nickel used aura in his sword and slashed at the masked man. After evolving and gaining a Dantian, it's not surprising that Nickel could use aura. The masked man was just that tough. Andreas wanted to know who he was. Nickel and the masked man started to go slash for slash, with the masked man getting hurt as it prolonged. Nickel then jumped at him, but the masked man stabbed Nickel through his skull. But to the masked man's surprise, it didn't do anything, and Nickel kicked him in the chin, sending him out the window. After being thrown outside, he was caught by Paimon. Paimon asked Dan what he was doing, and if he wanted money, he should start pushing himself harder. To Andreas' panic, Paimon summoned the undead, while Andreas was distracted. Paimon noted that Nickel must be a phantom, while from the behind he spawned undead. Paimon then wanted to see how long Andreas would last against his Finst, and since they were standing on top of Mountain of Corpses, since it was a cemetery. Andreas, since they were surrounded, told Nickel to split up, and when the time is right, they will take Paimon's back. Andreas broke a window to get out and started to hack away at the undeads. Multiple of them surrounded him from behind, and when he noticed, he used Earth Shield to destroy them. Even more came behind, and he used stone spears to destroy them. Undead archers were aiming at Andreas, which Andreas noticed and slashed them away. Paimon called the undeads a useless bunches, and they couldn't kill one kid. Behind him, Nicola and Dan were still fighting each other. While blocking Nicola's attack, Dan managed to plant a sticky bomb in his ribcage, which Nicola noticed. The bomb exploded, and since the undead were swarming Andreas, he didn't time to use recovery potion. At this rate, things could get really bad. Andreas started to get tired and needed to know where Nickel was, and his whole body was going numb. It was as if every muscle in his body is being torn apart. An undead vomited acid at Andreas, which tore his cape. He wondered while fighting the undead if until Nickel is back if he could hold on. He then noticed a skeleton trying to slash at him with an axe which he barely managed to block, and swarms of undead rushed at him. Andreas got overpowered and got headbutt by the skeleton, and the skeleton started to beat the crap out of him. Andreas wondered if he was going to die there at the hands of a mere skeleton knight. If he died there, what would happen to Amy, Lucia's illness, and Vivienne? He finally had a reason to live and couldn't die there. He then got a pop-up saying that through continuous training, talent, and fierce combat, Aura had awakened. His Dantian was activated and Aura could be used. Due to the dual core trait, Aura and Mana could be used simultaneously. He grabbed his sword and killed the skeleton. He was going back to where he belonged. He achieved the achievement. Second awakening had been achieved. In the mound of corpses, Andreas, who was injured, heard Paimon call for help. Nickel was pointing his sword at Paimon's neck. Andreas asked where the ring was. Paimon, scared, told him to put the sword away and then they can talk, and since one is already dead, Andreas can negotiate a better deal. Andreas, looking at Dan's body, decided to use his sword. Paimon is getting more scared and Andreas asks where the ring is again. Paimon told him to wait, but Andreas slashed one of his hands away. Andreas told him to start talking and that he had no interest in discussing things further. Paimon then told him that it was in the bottom drawer of the cupboard in the house. Paimon then started to cough a lot to the point of coughing blood and dying. Andreas saw something purple come out of his body. Andreas planned to get rid of him eventually, but looking at Dan's sword, it had poison. Since Dan was a skilled swordsman with a poisoned sword, Andreas wondered who he was. He then remembered Paimon calling his name and realized it was Bloody Dan. Andreas then took his mask off, since if it was Bloody Dan then his face would change, which it did like Andreas thought. After putting on the mask, Andreas' appearance changed, which confirmed that it was Bloody Dan, the one who started the war in the game. Later in the game, he would be hired to kidnap the Northern Barbarian Chief's child, which triggered a major war between the North and the Empire. Originally, the war would have spread throughout the continent and Andreas would be dragged into it, which he unexpectedly prevented. Dan wasn't the sort of character who was going to live out his life anyway, and Andreas thanked Dan for the mask and he would put it to good use. Andreas told Nickel to look for the ring while he cleans up the mess. In Alvin Street's clinic, Andreas, covered in bandages, was using the tablet to see the news about Dan and Paimon being dead. The news said that they fought over gold. Andreas wouldn't get affected by it. Andreas then started to take care of the most important stuff. He bought his mansion back. Andreas then wondered how Amy would react, but someone from behind him closed his eyes with her hands, and she asked him to guess who she was. Andreas just laid in his bed silently. Lucia then removed her hands and told him that he is no fun. Lucia asked what was with the curt reaction, even though his cute junior came to visit him. In the dorm room, Andreas put the body of the tiger in a magic circle while looking at the book. Thanks to the trait he got from the achievement reward, he can learn necromancy skills much faster. The trait Enlightenment made it so the deeper one ponders and explores, the higher chance of understanding the theory. It was a trait that increases the speed of learning skills and knowledge. He learnt Blood Curse, Ghoul Summoning, Corpse Explosion, Revenant Summoning, and Skeleton Summoning. He could now even summon a Revenant, and it was time for him to try and summon Timer. He thought he should be fine since he has double-checked all the potential causes of failure dozens of times. After raising his hand, he activated Minor Necromancy. Since he could fully utilize the dual core and Nickel had evolved, if he added the powerful force of Timer to the mix, even if Andreas was alone, he would have the might of a whole troop. After chanting him to rise, a pop-up came saying the material's ability value exceeds that of Summoner, the stability decreased, and additional effects applied. Timer then opened his eyes, the pop-up saying he summoned a legendary Revenant. Since the level of the completed corpse is high, status bonuses were added, and the level of the corpse is extremely high, it evolved a tier to Revenant Fighter. Since the level of the completed corpse is transcendent, it regained some of its former egos. Timer then roared very loudly, but thankfully Andreas had casted a soundproof magic. Andreas told the kneeling Timer that he will be Timer's master from now on. After summer and autumn left, winter came, and so did the end-of-term exam. In the Vilborn Snowy Mountains in Marquis Magnus territory, the students were gathered. The instructor then started to explain the exam. The themes were survival and collecting points. All students would spend 72 hours on the mountain, and they would have to collect the points hidden throughout the mountain. Julik told Diane that she was sure Diane would beat everyone this time too. The bracelets they were wearing also counted towards their points, and they might want to take someone else's bracelet. If the students are evacuated, aren't able to continue, or the bracelet is damaged, they would be disqualified immediately. He then told everyone to put their blindfolds on, and the supervisor would escort them to the starting point. In the cliffside around 46 hours before the test finished, Andreas climbed to a flat area at the top of a cliff which looked like it could be useful for both attack and defense, and wanted to set a base. He saw Diane barely standing tired, who was using wide area search magic and a barrier. At the same time, Andreas noted that she might be able to protect herself from the blizzard and still be able to find her way around, but the mana consumption would be immense. She then fell down, and Andreas knew she used all of her mana. If he wanted to, he could take the bracelet and eliminate a powerful competitor. But if he had Diane's support, he would easily reach the top. As he was approaching Diane, she noticed him and warned him not to move. Andreas told her that she used too much magic, and Diane recognized him. Andreas warned her that magic is useful, but if used recklessly in an environment like that, she would get herself into trouble. Diane shouted at him that he was only after her bracelet, pretending to give her advice, and she may be exhausted but can beat someone like him. But as she said that, to her shock, the magic in her hands disappeared. Andreas then gave a suggestion to Diane on the ground, who was telling him to stay back. After dragging herself a bit further away from him, she told him to say it at that distance. Andreas was in disbelief that she hated it that much. Diane asked him what he wanted. Andreas asked her if she would team up with him. Diane asked him the reason, and Andreas told her that if he is alone, he will be vulnerable if something happened, and it's much better to have a partner just in case. Diane was thinking that it may be true, but she couldn't trust Andreas because of who he was. She started to panic if it was for pride, reputation, profit, or personal gain. Andreas then took out a chocolate from his bag, and Diane started to drool uncontrollably. Andreas told her that they should get along. Diane told him not to get it wrong, and Andreas asked her if she didn't want it. In an unknown part of the mountain, two monster-like creatures killed a student, and the big goblin asked the goblin if the person he killed was their target, to which the goblin said that he's not even close. The big goblin then said that his eyes are bad, and the goblin told him many times that he had green hair. The goblin complained that the weather was bad and was stuck doing a shitty job, and they had no choice since they were paid. The goblin then cursed the person who gave them the job. Above their heads, a floating eyeball was there telling if they had time to babble, to get going and find him. The eye told that was why he didn't want to use fools like them. The big goblin called him Kidwell and said that he did a little research on the target, and asked him why he used them to deal with a mere student, and heard that he was coming too. Kidwell told them to mind their own business and do exactly what Jester asked them to do. And then he ordered them to go and kill the target. The small goblin, with his mood ruined, told the big one to rest before they went, but the big one told him to track the smell a bit further. The smell is either from students or supervisors, and if they only kill the students, they would reach the target eventually, and since the students would be their enemies one day, it was their chance to kill a lot of them. The small goblin, laughing, told him that he was damn right. Kidwell, who was watching, had no expectations of them from the beginning, and to draw attention to themselves. When he turned around, there were a lot of mages preparing magic to plant a bomb formation on top of the mountain, and they were very close to burying Jester's target. Andreas told Diane they had gathered 6 bands. The students hung on the tree by their legs and told him to let them down. Andreas analyzed that based on the current circumstances, they must have been a top group. Diane wondered where he learned to track and capture like that, and on top of that, he managed to move swiftly over rugged mountain paths. It was as if he was a completely different person. Diane then asked Andreas what happened to him, and until then he had been an absolute scumbag. Andreas smiled bitterly since, as always, she didn't mince her words and told her that if he had stayed the way he was, he would lose everything. He told her like she said. He was an absolute scumbag and didn't pay any attention to his sister, even though he was her only family left. And when he realized that, he made up his mind to do better, and as he worked towards it, he discovered he also had a gift. Andreas then apologized to Diane for all the horrible things he had done, and Diane told him it was okay. Andreas asked her if they could get going and aim for the top. Diane, with a determined face, agreed with him. Ivy, who heard everything, told herself that he didn't even blink when he killed someone in the Balleric case, and questioned how a scumbag recently changed for the better. She wondered how someone who's been living like a fool became like that just because of a change of heart, and found Andreas as an interesting lad. While running, Diane asked how long before they reached the point location, to which Andreas, who was looking at the map, said it would probably take 3 minutes. They could collect points by either taking other bracelets from students or by capturing the point objects marked on the map. Andreas warned Diane to get ready for an enemy attack. The goblins then came up to them, the big one slashing at the ground, which the two of them dodged. The small goblin was laughing since more kids showed up. The big one wondered if he missed, and the small one told him that his eyes are shit. Andreas thought he recognized them. Diane asked him if he was okay. He told her that he was fine, but while looking behind the goblin there were students on the ground, telling her that the things didn't look good there. Diane asked what happened there. The small goblin told them to rejoice, calling them mantos to the two's confusion. The small one noted that Andreas was their target because of his green hair. Diane looked at Andreas more confused. The green one laughed since it was worth the wait. Andreas asked them if they knew him. The big one told him not to be a stranger and that they came to see him, while the small one was licking his knife, telling the big one to kill him and get out of there. Andreas told them if they wanted him to let the others go, they would talk somewhere more private. Diane then asked him if he was crazy and to fight them together. Andreas told her that some of the students were still alive and to take care of them till the overseers arrived. Before Diane could say anything except but, he told her that he was confident he could win. The green one started to laugh listening to him, asking him if he was stupid if he thought he could beat them. The green one was laughing, saying it suited them, with the three of them going away to another place. Diane started to get concerned about Andreas. After walking a while, Andreas asked if the area they were in was good enough. The big one told him it was good since no one would notice if they made a loud noise there. The small one asked if all they had to do was cut his head, so he wouldn't be recognized, and the big one said it was that and to get it over with quick. The big one then immediately slashed his axe, which Andreas dodged, and the small one tried to slash him from the behind. The big one then came rushing at him with his axe, and Andreas used his sword to cut his axe in half. To their shock, he was not just a wizard. Andreas asked them if they were mantos and Glau, and they better drop the prejudice that wizards can't use swords. Glau asked him how he knew their names, and Andreas said that he would tell them who from the congregation sent them. Glau told Mantos that it looked bad. Nickel and Timer were then summoned, while warning if they didn't want to talk, they would. The two, getting scared, realized that they were fooled and cursed Kidwell. Mantos then put on gauntlets, and Andreas told the ready Nickel to wait and he could cut down anyone who tried to run away. Mantos then ran at Andreas to punch him. Andreas tried to combine his skills from when he was still Makoto with his combat prowess. Andreas then deflected Mantos's hand and used it to assist him on kicking Mantos. Glau then tried to stab him, but his dagger was removed from his hand, which Andreas caught. He then told Glau to watch him on how to use a dagger as he slashed at Glau. While Glau and Andreas were fighting, Mantos was still on the ground. Andreas then managed to slash away at Glau and kick him away. Andreas then looked over at Mantos, who called out to Glau in concern. He then mocked them, asking if they were done already, and Nickel and Timer hadn't had the chance to play. Diane then left the students in the care of a supervisor. The supervisor told her that they were all aware of her abilities and standing at the academy, but it would be best if they worked together. Diane couldn't just stand by and let any more casualties happen. The supervisor told her that they will follow her as soon as they can and to make sure she stays out of their sight. Mantos was hurt on the ground, and Andreas told him to start talking about who sent them. Mantos told Andreas to kill him already, and Andreas asked Nickel for his sword. After he got his word, he was ready to kill him and told them that he had other ways to find out and to not waste their breath. Glau then screamed at him, telling him that the jester sent them to Mantos' shock. Glau told Mantos that they don't owe a damn to anyone who treats them animals. He then told Andreas that there were more than just the two of them. Andreas did not expect it to be Jester. Jester acted despite Salem's threats, He was confident he won't be found out if he kills Andreas, which is why the two of them were causing such a ruckus. Andreas asked them where the others were. Glau said they didn't know, and even they wouldn't make an enemy of Rodlen, so they were probably preparing something like a landslide. Jester was trying to eliminate him by making it look like an accident to create an alibi to avoid being hunted by Salem and Rodlen. Glau told Mantos that they will get out of there, and Andreas asked them if they could leave easily after killing all those students. Andreas threateningly asked who said that he would let the two of them live. Diane, who was climbing the mountain, had almost reached the summit but couldn't find Andreas anywhere. She then noticed that she stepped on a trap of magic circle. Then a whole bunch of magicians also used magic on her. He managed to shield herself from those attacks. They attacked her from the summit. Diane knew they weren't the ones from before and asked who they were. Kidwell wondered what kind of rat scuttled their ritual place, but she was no run-of-the-mill brat. Diane told him that they attacked her out of the blue and won't answer her questions and to not blame her if they die. She then used snowstorms with ice magic to send the mages flying. Kidwell was shocked to see her use it. Diane then, using all her powers, screamed at them to disappear while killing them. Kidwell told the fools to dodge it. Kidwell complimented her for having a frightening control of her mana despite her age. Even then, to Kidwell, she was just a brat. He then grabbed the floating eye and put it in his forehead, finding her amusing, and told her that he would play with her until their business was done. The eye then looked like it covered his body, and Diane was shocked to see black magic. Ivy also noticed the presence on the top of the summit. Diane was blocking all of the eye attack, but her mana was going to deplete soon. The other mages also started to attack her, and she couldn't put up a barrier anymore. Kidwell, laughing, told her that is what he calls a difference in experience. Diane then told him it wasn't a difference in power, but he just added an extra head on top. The kid got mad and threatened her he was going to rip her to pieces. Diane told him that threatening her made him more ridiculous. Her magic then deactivated on its own to her shock, and Kidwell attacked with the tentacles from his eyes. All of the tentacles were then cut by Andreas, who was wearing Dan's mask, to Kidwell's and Diane's shock. Diane asked him who he was, and Andreas told her that he was a mercenary hired by Rodlen. He told her to run away since he would fight Kidwell. Diane asked if he was out of his mind since he shows up out of nowhere and thinks he could take on the guys by himself. Andreas told her that his goal was neither his or hers. He couldn't call out Nickel and Timer because Diane was there. Andreas says that he wants to start a landslide in the whole area and tells her to run away again. Kidwell asked who he was and why he knew that. Andreas told him that he wouldn't say it to someone who is about to die. Kidwell, angered, threw his tentacles at Andreas, which he cut with his sword while rushing towards Kidwell. The other mages tried to stop him, but he blocked it with his sword and disappeared to their confusion. He then cut all of the other mages, and Diane was awestruck by his speed. Kidwell then launched an attack at him. Diane told him to watch out. The attack seemed like it hit, causing an explosion. After the explosion, the mages called out to Kidwell. When Diane opened her eyes, she saw Andreas had stabbed Kidwell, killing him. Then the eye, making gurgling sounds, started to attack Andreas. Andreas, who blocked the hit, was pushed back. Diane asked him if he was all right, and Andreas ordered her to stay back. The host was dead, but the body was still moving, so Andreas wondered if the monster took over his body. The monster, using Kidwell's body, screamed out mana, and the monster put its tentacles inside his mouth, making his body its own. It then completely took over Kidwell's body. After seeing Andreas, it started to attack him with its tentacles, and Andreas had to grab Diane and run away. The monster then indiscriminately started to attack everyone, killing Kidwell's mages. Andreas got in cover behind some stones and told Diane to escape while he made an opening. Andreas then ran at the monster, cutting its tentacles on the way. Diane didn't know who he was, but he saved her life and couldn't just abandon him, and decided to help him as she started to form something from ice. She told herself to take it slow and as steady as possible and condense the energy and make it thinner and sharper. She successfully created an ice spear. Andreas, who was holding the monster back, wanted to summon Nickel or Timer but couldn't because of Diane. He then noticed Diane's ice spear. While dodging the monster, he wanted to know why Diane hasn't run away yet, and she really doesn't listen to anyone. when Dain noticed an opening and shot it at the monster, damaging it greatly, which exposed a mana core. Andreas became rash and tried to destroy it but was almost hit by the monster. To Andreas' shock, the monster started to attack Kidwell's mage to absorb their mana. The bodies from where it absorbed the mana from turned into skeletons. After absorbing the mana, the monster grew in size. Andreas cursed since it was getting bad, but then he felt a shielding made of ice magic and also sharpness up and even haste too. When he turned back, Dain fell to the ground since she used up all her mana. She was using all her remaining mana for those. Andreas told her to not push herself anymore and just run. With his body feeling lighter, he rushed over to the monster. The monster then started to use its tentacles to try and hold him back. There was no end to it. Andreas kept dodging and knew he had to find the core. When he got close to it, he slashed it, but it didn't do anything. The wound it got was healing it. Andreas' hit was too shallow. But then somehow, the monster was cut all the way through by someone killing it instantly. Andreas then noticed Ivy was there. Ivy, sheathing her sword, asked him who he was. Andreas then started to panic because it was Ivy out of everyone. He just stood there silently. Ivy warned him if he didn't answer, she would kill him and rip that mask off herself. Then the mountain started to shake. Andreas told Ivy that the black mages planted a large explosive magic circle, and if not destroyed immediately, the students would be harmed. Ivy told the punk to quit bluffing. Ivy was looking at the summit silently, and Andreas told that it would explode soon. Andreas then ran away, telling her that he left it to her. Ivy then promised to definitely find him, and when the circle started to explode, she went up the mountain. Andreas took off his mask, hiding behind a tree, sighing in relief. As he was looking at the mountain summit, he was sure since it was Ivy, she would take care of it. In the Tenora Strait, in a castle, there was a mermaid's body within a magic circle. Jester then, while using magic on her, stopped because of Salem. Jester told Salem that it was his private retreat and its common manners to inform before he visits someone. Salem told Jester that he is the one with no manners. After getting off the window, asked Jester if he was underestimating Salem, since if he weren't he would pull such a stunt. Jester then pretended not to know what he was talking about. Salem then started to get angry and put his mana in his arm because Jester was playing dumb. Salem then asked Jester if he wasn't tired of living and wanted Salem to cremate him. Jester then asked what Salem wanted. Salem then opened a bottle of alcohol and poured it on a cup, telling Jester knew what he wanted. If he had insisted it was a natural disaster and wasn't him, he would be in a lot of trouble. Salem then told him to lend the diligent sloth for a week, and only then would he let Jester off the hook. In the academy, Andreas was using his tablet while walking while reading about the disaster in the end-of-year exam. With Tolman's suspicion, Bact took over the investigation. Since it looked like things would be noisy, Andreas decided to keep a low profile. Ivy, who was waiting for him, told him that he went to the night training grounds a lot. She wondered why she had to go all the way over there to find a mage. She told him to follow her. Andreas was worried that she found out. Ivy asked him if he knew why she was there. Andreas told her he knew somewhat. Ivy then smiled, making things a lot easier. She thought it was awfully straightforward. Andreas told her that he wasn't ready to start a relationship with someone of the opposite sex yet. Ivy told him that she would kill him. Ivy told him that Dain told her about the demi-human duo who killed the students and asked what happened to them. Andreas told her that he didn't know, and as he told the investigation bureau, he managed to escape when they were distracted. He was glad Dain didn't tell her that they were after him. Ivy called out bullshit and asked him if she was expected to believe that story. Andreas told her that it was the truth and wanted to leave. Ivy then started to attack Andreas with her sword, which Andreas managed to block with his own sword. A scrawny mage like him managed to block her, an assistant professor of the night facility. All Andreas did was block her sword, but his hand was shaking a lot. Ivy told him that it was fishy, and Andreas asked her if she was implying that he was one of the black mages. Vivienne was eavesdropping on them, hiding behind a pillar. Ivy told him that it was only logical since whenever there is a case involving black mages he acts suspiciously, and in the Balric case he managed to take down the mage who trapped her. Ivy noted that his voice was different but had the same body type and wondered how he did it. Andreas took it that she wasn't convinced by what he told the bureau. Ivy also said that ever since the midterm exam, Vivienne changed and asked him what he did to her. Vivienne was surprised that her name came up in the conversation. Andreas told Ivy that all he did was save her. Ivy was confused by what he said. Andreas continued by telling her that he only went inside the barrier and rescued her. Vivienne was finally sure that Andreas was Mr. Fairy. Ivy then screamed at him, telling him to stop bullshitting her. While pointing her sword at him, she asked how a failure like him waltz in and out of a black mage barrier freely. Vivienne then came out and told Ivy that it was true and Andreas did save her life that day. Ivy then put her sword back and told Andreas that she would be watching him. Andreas then thanked Vivienne for helping him and Vivienne told him not to worry about it. This conversation finally confirmed to Vivienne that Andreas was Mr. Fairy. In the mansion, Amy was going through some books. Lupin then came over and told her that they had finished cleaning up the mansion. Amy thanked her since it must have been hard with how long it was abandoned. Lupin said that it wasn't, and since they thought it would be inappropriate to enter the study that the previous family head had used. She wanted Amy to have a look at it first. Amy decided to check it out right away. When she reached her father's study, she smiled bitterly, remembering being scolded when she hid there to play hide and seek with Andreas. After opening the door, it was a mess since there was no one to look after it. On the ground, she noticed a photo frame. In a train in the Welton territory, Andreas asked Salem if he was being a bit indiscreet. Salem was confused and Andreas told him for the continent's greatest black magician to turn up in a place like that. Salem was a bit mad since he was giving Andreas an extracurricular lesson in person and he was complaining. He told Andreas that all sorts of people were after him because he was too weak. Salem, completely ignoring Andreas' words, told him that they would get into it. He asked Andreas if he knew that the aura he had in Dantian and mana in the heart are basically the same, which Andreas knew. Salem told him that in theory you could convert both of them and put them to use, which was impossible without a dual core, but there was no need for one. Salem wanted to teach Andreas the method to teach him the method for conversion called transference. After 10 minutes, both the technique and activation were easy. He never thought it would be possible to convert mana into aura so fast. Salem, looking at him, wondered what an extraordinary thing he devised. Since it looked like Andreas got the hang of it, Salem told him to keep practicing, preparing to leave. Andreas then told him to tell him if he knew anything about his father and Cromwell House. Salem told him that Cain was Morn's apprentice. This was news to Andreas. Salem, like he said before, told him to find out the details himself since it was a pain to explain everything. Salem then left through the windows. Andreas wanted to ask him what he meant. Andreas did not know Cain was a black mage here or in the game, and it was a good thing he was going home. If he searched the house, he might find something. After reaching home, he went to the study room. Amy asked what he thought since Lupin did a great job of tidying up the place. Andreas asked if it was their father's study room, and Amy told him since it was in shambles. She fitted it with a new set of furniture. Andreas then thanked her since it could be used as an office. She made sure to leave all the important stuff in place. She then showed him the family photo from when they were children. Amy asked Andreas if it brought back memories. Andreas had a strange feeling. He felt nostalgic, but at the same time, the feelings are like someone else's. After Andreas touched the photo, it started to glow, surprising them. It then opened a secret passageway hidden behind bookshelves. Amy asked Andreas what that was. When Andreas touched the photo frame, it triggered a magic circle opening the hidden door. Andreas noted that if it only activated when both of them touched it, it meant that what was inside could be Cain's inheritance, or more likely his will. He wanted to go inside first. Since it was hidden like that, there must be something amazing there. Andreas told Amy he is going to check it and told her to wait outside. Amy told him that she can't let him go in alone. Andreas told her that the magical device would be too much for her and it was dangerous. Andreas then orders her to go out, which she complies to and tells Andreas to be careful. After going down the stairs, he sensed a black magic item. It was the same feeling he had with the sloth. After walking in the hallway, he saw a tree. There were many rare fairy flowers there. The pop-up came up saying it was Codex Apocalypse, the purest original sin which was awaiting to bear fruit. Andreas was shocked to see the main part of the codex there and wanted to know why something he never saw in the game was there. He then saw a paper hanging off a branch and took it out. It was a letter. After opening it, someone from behind him patching Andreas sees something. Andreas then saw the past of Cain, where he was growing the seed of the original sin. After managing to grow it properly, Morshi was very happy, but later Cain's wife died, and not wanting to let the Emperor use his kids, he did something. Andreas finally understood what happened. The Empire and Black Mages were in cahoots with each other, and like Salem said, the Emperor left Cain in care of Morn. He studied black magic and sprouted the original sin, but after he achieved that, he was discarded since he was no longer useful to the Emperor. The death of his wife, the mysterious illness and downfall of his family, Cain realized that the Emperor arranged all of that. So he decided to take revenge in his own way by hiding the original sin in a place only accessible by the siblings only. Cain from behind him asked Andreas if he got a good look at the memories of his father, or should he call him Makoto Kaneshiro instead. Andreas then unsheathes his sword and points at his neck, asking who he is. The man told him it was a shame since he thought Makoto would figure out right away, being a game addict. After saying, "Thank you for playing the game," Andreas asked him if he was the dev that brought him there. The dev said he was correct and asked how the world of deadly sins is. Andreas asked him why he was brought there. The dev told him that he just wanted him to clear the game. Andreas was confused on what the game meant. The dev told him that Andreas has seen how the world ends multiple times as Luis, Lucia and Diane, but ultimately all of them ended in an apocalyptic ending. The world ended up being destroyed by the outburst of the original sin that swallowed up all the deadly sins and their owners. Andreas asked what he was talking about, since once you collect all the deadly sins and the original sin and defeat the final boss, the end of the world should be averted. The dev told him that that was as far as he saw, but as long as the original sin's consciousness exists, the world would eventually come to an end, and to stop that, Andreas had complete control of it. Andreas asked if it was to control the original sin. The dev told him that only Cain's flesh and blood could do that. A pop-up saying the immature original sin demands a contractor's blood. The original sin had sensed him. The dev told him that he may be a talentless scum, but very few can enter the place before the original sin matures, and Andreas was one of the few. The dev continued by telling him that after 6 months it has grown conscious. The original sin will emerge outside the ward and seek its own host. Andreas wondered why he was reincarnated as a trash character, but it was because with Cain hiding the original sin, only Amy and he had access to it. Andreas asked the dev what he wanted to do exactly. The dev told him to sign a contract with the original sin and become its host and feed it the deadly sins to tame it. Andreas told him it was easy for him to say, since if he fails, the sin will devour him too. The dev told him it was the only way, and if he succeeds, both him and the world would survive, as he was disappearing. He apologized for bringing Andreas there and asking him to do that, but he was counting on Andreas. He then, before disappearing, told Andreas that he believed in his son. And if it is Andreas, he was sure Andreas could do it, and to look after Amy. Andreas then looked at the original sin, took off his glove and cut his arm. It wasn't one of those otherworldly reincarnation stories, and while Andreas didn't like the idea of being forced to work for free, there was no other choice. He then touched the original sin with his bloody hand, which made the original sin reside within his body, and recognized Andreas as its master. His mana recovery increased by 144%. Mana density would increase over time. Mana element would be closer to dark over time. Increasing abilities, more deadly sins are collected, and more abilities are unlocked with more deadly sins being collected. Cain Cromwell, the father of the second half of Andreas' soul, can leave Amy and the Cromwell family to him. Andreas wished to let their souls rest in peace, and he would also avenge all the tragedies that befell him. He swore it. The Emperor asked Lamar Welton, the head of Intelligence Bureau, if he had found the original sin yet. Lamar told him that they had been looking into activities of Cain before he died, but couldn't find anything. The Emperor scolded him for being useless and calling himself the head of intelligence. The Emperor thinks that Cain must have entrusted it to one of his kin, and sooner or later, they were going to make a deal with him. Lamar then told him that they will investigate the Cromwellism more closely. The Emperor told him that right now they had just one young Cromwell and there was no need to rush. He then told Lamar to maintain the surveillance he had and better start with the deadly sins first. The emperor then asked about the Zephyr cult and that he was sure they are keeping a deadly sin for their god summoning. Lamar told him that they picked up some suspicious activities and that they believe the cult will be gathering a large number of people for the Zephyr summoning ceremony. The emperor told him to keep a close watch on them